Hey, I'm back. I have one more final to do before I'm done with this quarter, but that final isn't for a week as of the time that I'm recording this video, so I'm back to posting videos again. And as I am back, I'm also collaborating with other creators for our Winter Mathness event. And so, for this, I'm going to be collaborating with 3 other creators. And each of them will be uploading videos over the course of the next couple weeks that will then culminate in one final stream. And all those will have the theme of playing with the Mythic rules. So if you like the Mythic rules, go check out those other videos. You can expect Cyprime's build video to go up on the 14th. Raven Gaming will post a build guide on the 17th. Mathfinder will post their build on the 19th. And then I'll do a video about my prep work and how to prep for a Mythic campaign on the 20th. For the final stream, which will be on the 22nd at 3:30 Pacific Standard Time. If I remember to do so, it should be live on my channel as like a thing you can wait in the lobby for, but nothing's gonna happen until that time. But with all my announcements out of the way, let's just get into it and start with, what exactly are the Mythic rules? So the Mythic rules were a new subsystem introduced in War of Immortals that increased the power level of a game significantly. I'd say, from experience, it increases about as much as dual class would, but it does it in a more spiky and possibly interesting way. And its most impactful player-focused mechanic is, of course, the Mythic point. It's pretty reasonable to get 5 of these in a session, because you start every session with 3, and you can regain them in a laundry list of ways. So it's pretty often that you'll get 2 recovered Mythic points back in a session, so Mythic points are decently easy to come by. And Mythic points can be used to reroll stuff at Mythic Proficiency, which is 10+ level, so basically a tier above Legendary, and characters can in theory have access to that Mythic Proficiency on skill checks as early as level 1, even if they were untrained in that skill before, because they can re-roll using the Rewrite Fate ability. So player characters get to be a lot more versatile because if they're in a high-intensity scenario where they need a specific skill, they can just re-roll it with Rewrite Fate. And that's pretty convenient. Of course, Mythic things can also affect monsters, and monsters can get Mythic points to do a laundry list of things, you get extra resistances and saving throws, and all that kind of good stuff. That is the baseline of all you need to understand to be engaged with the Mythic game discussion as the rest of the video will roll out. So, the first thing I want to talk about is, why would you run a Mythic game? Because I think that a lot of the critiques I've been hearing about the Mythic subsystem comes from people rubbing against the genre it is trying to do. Because the Mythic subsystem is trying to be extremely high fantasy, and is trying to give ways for player characters to do stuff that feels outside of the bounds of normal, while still keeping some kind of balance to the system as a whole. I think it is decently successful at achieving that goal in a reasonably non-complex manner. The point of it is to get a slightly different texture of a game. And that texture that Mythic adds changes as you level up. Throughout levels like 1 through 5, the Mythic points are mostly there to give you that bump into that higher tier, and you can only really reroll skill checks and saving throws to be able to tackle these hard challenges, particularly skill challenges, while not giving that much combat prowess unless you're a grappler, or some other build that relies on public skill checks, because you can't really reroll private skill checks just because of... Anyway. Characters will be more versatile because they can reroll skills that they're bad at. And again, it's not that much complexity. You do get an extra feat path using the full variant, and the Mythic feats can be pretty impactful, but it's still not that complex. And really, I think that the Mythic feats are less complex than your average archetype feat. So if your playgroup is already pretty good at using free archetype, Mythic is actually going to be a step down in complexity compared to free archetype, So I don't really think that complexity is going to be an issue for most playgroups, because a lot of playgroups will already be using the free archetype variant. I also really appreciate how mythic points being a somewhat limited resource, but not super limited, means you can do cool things with them and not feel like you're wasting your points, but you still have to make decisions if they start to run low. So it's still a thing that you have to make decisions about, and which feats am I taking can make your character feel different, and what you're choosing to reroll with your points can make you feel different. And there's the decision of, do I actually want to reroll this? And that's a somewhat interesting decision if you get like a decently high number, but you don't think it's going to be enough to get what you exactly need. There are scenarios where you may want to reroll a normal success with a mythic point to try and crit, if a crit effect is really good, like for example on a disarm or a grapple, because restrained is so strong, where you can then decide to reroll successes, and that's like a reasonable thing to try and do at like the early levels. So interesting decisions to be made using the mythic things. I say all that as good stuff, but there have been a lot of complaints about the mythic subsystem, so I just kind of want to talk about each of them in an order that I feel like builds up context for the rest of them. So the first one I want to talk about is about how callings and their anathemas can be overbearing. And the example that a lot of people like to harp on about is the Artisan's Calling, and specifically with its anathema that says that you cannot use items that are made by other people. Because some people have interpreted this to mean you can no longer use doorknobs because that doorknob was made by somebody else and your character understands how to use a doorknob. So you can't use the excuse of, oh, I'm just figuring out how it works. Your character can no longer use gold coins because they're crafted by somebody else. Your character can no longer just buy a bag at a store. You must craft the bag from leather yourself using the craft activity, take a full day of downtime for every single item you want to use. I don't think that's the intent of the rule here, because that's against the spirit of a mythic game. It is saying for your major equipment, you should be making it rather than just buying it from a store. Because what that calling represents is you are a tinkerer. You are going to want to make your own gear. And you're not going to be comfy or happy with using gear made by somebody else. And you can roleplay this as, I feel like I could do it better. And play a character with a bit of a chip on their shoulder, or do other things with it. I think if your GM is going to interpret clauses like that to that degree of literal bludgeoning on top of character concepts, I don't think they're the type of GM that would want to run a Mythic game, because Mythic inherently means giving player characters more control over the story, because they can succeed at these skill checks to do wild things. They can take things once they get to the higher level archetypes that just give them some knights and eventually a kingdom potentially through the prophesized monarch, and other various things that let them very much move and shake the world. So if you're the type of GM that will get hung up on a coin is technically an item, so you can no longer use coins, Mr. Craftsman, I don't think you're gonna enjoy running a Mythic game. And I don't really think that's a major issue. I kind of like that the anathemas are very big and in your face, because it gives you a thing to roleplay off of. And then you can work with your GM to figure out what that exactly means, because Mythic games will require a greater degree of GM deciding things and GM making custom creatures. So I think I should get into the custom creature making, because there are a few complaints with custom creatures that I can get into. And the first one is actually in its first couple creature abilities. Because if you make a Mythic monster, you get to pick between Mythic Resilience and Mythic Resistance. And Mythic Resistance doesn't matter if your characters are Mythic, because a Mythic character is a Mythic creature. Probably, it's not exactly clear, but like, I think it's a very hard argument to make that a Mythic character is not a Mythic creature. And for Mythic Resilience, that still blocks like entire save off from being able to be targeted. And in theory, as a creature levels, by level 13, they could just have triple Mythic Resilience and be untargetable from all saves, like in theory. Now, Mythic Resilience just says +1 degree of success on every single saving throw on that stat. So, yeah, caster spell accuracy, give that a -10. I don't know. That is legitimately a problem in the rules. I'm not going to try and defend that one, but I interpret the mythic abilities in a different way than most GMs. I view this as Paizo saying, here are the type of things a mythic monster can do. Feel free to make your own stuff with this. And it is giving the example of resilience and resistance as things you could give monsters in order to make them feel mythic. The mythic powers that you can get are tools that you can then put into different creatures that you make in order to make them feel mythic. Because, like, they only give a handful of different mythic monsters as just kind of like vague examples. And it recommends a GM custom build a lot of the mythic monsters. So you're going to want to stay tuned for my GM guide on how I would approach prepping for a mythic campaign for more detail on those. But mythic resistance doesn't affect like the marshals that's supposed to stop, but the mythic resilience really can hurt casters. So that's led to a lot of people saying that casters get neutered in the mythic system, which I don't think is true. Because if you are building creatures that they have weaknesses, you're only really taking one mythic resilience, and you shouldn't be targeting a creature's best save anyway. Mythic resilience just makes it obvious that you cannot approach it in that way, and you need to find a different way around it. So I don't think it actually stops casters that much. And mythic spells do exist. I don't think they're necessarily the best spells. They're really good, but they also cost a mythic point, and mythic points start to become really good due to feats. So I'm going to just read off some of the feats I think are super impactful and describe why. And that's where you can get things like Godspeed, which can let you basically self-haste, but only for striding or other move actions, basically, while getting a plus 10 foot status bonus to all speeds for only a single action and a mythic point. And that happens for an entire minute. So Godspeed can actually really help a character fix their mobility issues. You can grab Correct the Story to force an enemy to re-roll something that they critically succeeded on. So Correct the Story can be used to help protect your allies if you're like a backline mage and you see your fighter get crit. You can Correct the Story, make them re-roll that attack roll. They're probably not critting that second time. Or if they critically succeed against your slow did nat 20ing, you could say, no you didn't, go ahead and re-roll that save against slow. And if you are Sage's Calling, you can grab access to Mythic Counterspell, which is just a really good counterspell ability that just works. It costs a mythic point, but like it's counterspell, like a 5e style counterspell, which you normally need so much in order to build towards, but you can just kind of grab it in Mythic. You don't need to deal with different types of spell prep and like matching traits and all that stuff. You can grab Mythic Magic to get a variety of spells that are auto-heightened and will be cast at Mythic Proficiency. I think this spell is this ability is best used on like martial characters because they normally don't have access to magic, so they can use this to fix like a ranged weakness. Their inability to target will saves very well. And then they can use things like Calm, which normally have incap because it's automatically heightened. It kind of get around the incap trait. If it's things that are on level, you can drop big incap spells at Mythic Proficiency on them, and it's really cool. Unbreaking Castle, 2 actions, which is expensive, but it basically lets you raise a shield for your entire party by yourself. For a mythic point, for less than encounter, you raise shield for your entire party. And if somebody happens to miss you, you get to make a strike at them. Out of all those cool abilities I listed, only Unbreaking Castle mentions making a strike. There are plenty of ways to build a spellcaster in this type of system. Mythic does not directly harm spellcasters. It does not, like, make spellcasters completely useless. Yeah, some creatures will have very good saves, and in Mythic, those saves are even gooder. But they'll still probably have a poor save that you can target. So a well-played caster is really good in a Mythic game as well. And Mythic puts a lot more emphasis into skills, so having good mental stats to use a variety of skills is very nice. I don't buy into the casters are weak in a Mythic game type arguments. I just don't. I think that saying casters are weak in Pathfinder 2e is a skill issue. You can argue that, well, my pure fire damage caster is going to be weak, and it's like, well, yeah, that's where you should play Kineticist. And Kineticist may not interact with the Mythic rules as well, because they tend to not have great mental stats, so they're going to get less use out of things like Mythic magic, and they're not making strikes or casting spells, so all the feats that require one or the other, they're not going to make great use of. But being able to re-roll with Mythic points can fix their weakness of not having many trained skills. So I don't think Kineticist is fully useless in this either. It's just that you're going to be a little bit more pressed to try and find something interesting that you want. I still think there are plenty of good options, though. So I don't think it particularly benefits one type of character above another in terms of the martial caster, magic user, kineticist-y thing divide. I don't think it really puts its thumb on that scale too hard. What I do think it does is make Wrestler way better. Because, like, re-rolling skill checks, the most important skill check in combat is the athletics roll to grapple or disarm or trip. So having 3 rerolls that can be used on those but not strikes inherently makes characters that can get a ton of value out of skill checks better. And I don't think there's really a clean way around that. And, you know, if something was to become broken in a Mythic game, I'm happy it's the grapplers, because the iconic imagery of Hercules going in and wrestling with the Hydra and things of that nature are pretty common. Also, grappling is a support ability, and support abilities being busted is good because it encourages teamwork. Well, busted to a point. You get what I mean. And so, I'm going to now transition to my advice for players of a Mythic game. Do not underestimate the athletics maneuvers. They are so good, and you can actually evaluate the skill actions by their crit effects, especially in the early levels, where going up to Mythic proficiency puts you way above the expected math of the game. If you are a champion at level 1, making an athletics check using a Mythic point, you can get a plus 15 modifier at level 1. The extreme bonus for a saving throw on a level 1 creature is only plus 11. You beat the extreme modifier of their defensive stat by 4 using a Mythic point at level 1. You can disarm just about anything. A creature that is 3 levels above you and has an extreme modifier in that saving throw, you are still favored to win. That is when they get the plus 15 bonus that you have innately without using any type of other bonus, without using Athletic Rush. And also, another thing that you can use for skill actions in combat, aid. Aid is so good in a Mythic game, because if you aid and then you re-roll your aid check with a Mythic proficiency, you made that aid check with a Mythic proficiency. So when you critically succeed, you are giving them the legendary bonus of plus 4 circumstance. So you can massively help somebody with an aid if you are mythically aiding. And I don't think if you're a GM, you should patch that, by the way. And my reasoning is, in a storybook fable type thing, the heroes working together and setting people up. And if your players are burning Mythic points to help each other be awesome, that should be encouraged, you know? And yeah, if they manage to set it up all the time in combat, that's when you come in with some kind of mythic monster that has some really cool ability that can disrupt their combat loop somehow. And that's really where you're playing at that point. And that's the fun of a mythic game. It's not necessarily an arms race, you can pressure that type of strategy in a lot of ways. Something that makes reactions harder to do. Something that makes people not treat their allies as allies. Something that just simply outputs so much burst damage, they need to spend time healing, getting back on their feet, and doing other things. There are a lot of options to pressure them off of those routes. And I also want to note for the players, actually use your mythic points. They're more common than you'd think. And you can use mythic points to just try things, press buttons, let stuff just happen. You are sitting down to play a mythic game to let exciting stuff happen. So try and do exciting stuff. Ask your GM, can I just try to do that? And then you'll hit whatever DC they pick because that's mythic, baby. And if you don't, it'll make for a great story. So like, spend your mythic points, do cool stuff. And if you have the joys of playing in a mythic game, absolutely let me know how it goes. I'm loving running my mythic game. And I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.